much. Yeah, that's it. That's me in a nutshell. I guess the connotation with that is, basically a little bit of this, a little bit of that, involved with everything.
So you've been playing fantasy sports, as I've seen and seen on your site, for about 17 years or so. How did you get into playing fantasy sports, and also how did you get the radio gig started that you're currently doing right now?
Well, I started with fantasy sports. It's crazy. When I was like 14, 15 years old, and I was working at my father's pizzeria, and I used to be bored reading the newspaper all the time, and I was always big into sports, and I saw this little contest on USA Today about picking, some players out of like a box pool and trying to compete for their stats. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. Got my older brother to pay for it, and from that point on, I've been hooked, I guess. And that was the first thing that got me involved in fantasy sports. And since then, I was always progressing, doing more and more every year. Got to the point where a couple of years ago, my current fiance, my girlfriend at the time, she was always getting aggravated with the fact that I do all this fantasy sports, and she was always like, when are you going to do something with it other than just play it? So I started looking for somebody who was looking for, I guess, a sports show host, or maybe just to work on a show or something. And I happened to find the owner of I guess the internet station, and he said he just lost his sports guy, and he asked me to come in, and he interviewed me, and that's how I got involved about almost a year and a half ago.
And as you know, obviously the show that I'm doing here on Blog Talk Radio is on the Fantasy Sports channel. I do some fantasy sports. Sometimes I just, do regular stuff also. And a lot of guys say that being a fan, of a regular fan, and also being a fantasy sports fan are so different, because when you root for a team, you're not as worried about stats as you are as the final product of what goes on. Is that how you function as a fan and a fantasy player?
Yeah, I mean, I separate the two. I know people say it's hard to do, and sometimes it can affect you, but I guess because I'm a Mets, Jets, Islander, and Knicks fan, most of my players are never really big fantasy guys, except the Mets recently have been pretty good. But, I've always made sure my teams didn't involve my own players, I guess you would say. And then I also avoid getting players on my rival teams, like I try to avoid New York Yankees on my team. I try to avoid, New England Patriots, to an extent, So, and if I do draft, let's say, Tom Brady, I'll end up trading him for something. Or like in the past, I would draft a Chipper Jones, and then I would just trade him off to somebody. And, so I've always tried to separate the two, because, like you said, I mean, when you're rooting for a team, you just want wins, and you can't really worry about who's got how many hits, or you don't want to be rooting against your team to say, oh, let them just give up a couple of runs today so they can hurt this pitcher, but don't give up too many because I need to win, you got to separate the two. So I guess that's how I've done it over the years, but it is difficult to do when your team, like the Mets in the last couple of years, with David Wright, Jose Reyes, and guys like Johan Santana, now it's like, Jesus, you want those guys on your team, but then you don't want to get the double whammy that if they have a bad game or a bad season, you're screwed in fantasy as well.
Yeah, and thinking about it with basketball, you're just screwed because you have the Knicks. And although on my fantasy basketball team, I do have Chris Duhon, and off the bench, he's not terrible for me when I need him when someone gets hurt for a day. He's not great. I don't want to get too crazy. And if you have Stephon Marbury, I'm sure you're telling everybody to drop him.
It's funny because... Yeah, like last year, I just remember I was like, I was such a frustrated Knicks fan. I was like, I would never want this guy on my own team, never mind a fantasy team. The Knicks, it's sad that there hasn't really been basketball in New York for so long, and you know what, they're doing pretty decent this year. They're starting to maybe draw my attention a little bit. I'm starting to pay attention to when they have actual games, but I don't know if I'm going to spend the time yet to watch them until really, I can take it seriously.
Yeah, you don't know what to take seriously right now, but I have to say it's definitely a different thing than the guy over there that was in that house with the drugs, or with the I'm sorry, that was the sleeping pill thing. Yeah, it's definitely a different team, so that's good. I'm a Net fan, so to be very honest with you, after everybody started traded, there's not much over there either that you can really say is that great. Yeah, you got Carter still there, but he must be saying, what am I doing here? So
it's crazy.
both New York area teams not that great in basketball. Now on your site it says you had some accolades as a fantasy player. Can you tell us and tell me and my listeners a little bit about some of your accomplishments playing fantasy sports?
Well, basically, I mean, I came up a lot. Like started playing like I said, when I first started with like these big like USA Today leagues, and it was like newspaper leagues where you just join up and it was random stuff. And through the years, I started getting into obviously local leagues with like friends. People started inviting me to play, and I started just winning a lot of those. And then it got to the point where I started getting like, ESPN was like the first real site to really track your stats. So. When I started playing that, you start winning there too, and then you start getting bumped up, and people start paying attention to you. Now I'm part of, I'm forgetting, the American Patriots League, which is one of the top 5, Uber leagues on ESPN, and, I got invited to them after a few years in a couple other leagues, and you start getting more competitive. I guess one of the best accomplishments I had, was I won I came in first place on one of the ESPN weekly salary cap leagues. They send me a video game, whatever it was. That was my first real big accomplishment. I've been pretty much in the top, I guess, 1 percentile over the last couple of years, and it's getting, the thing is, like, I try to teach people on my show all the time, is like, if you're winning all the time, then you're either not playing, you got to start stepping up in competition then, you got to start moving up. You can't, if you say, oh, well, I played 9 leagues and I win all of them, well, then, either you're unbelievably superior to everybody, or you're not playing with your competition, So I've kind of moved up now in competition. So now, you struggle a little bit more, but at least you're, it's through the years. It's harder to win, which makes it more fun. But and then I also like one of the funniest things is I play in a league that I made about 8 years ago, and I kind of was like always winning it in the beginning as well. So I started changing the rules to make it harder for me to win. So now through the years, like the last couple of years, I've finished in like 3rd or 4th place. But it's more fun for me that way. But overall, as far as a lifetime player, I mean, now I've done my show. I'm getting a little bit more recognized by the community of people, and making a lot more contacts with people who are really good at fantasy sports. And I do have people on my show as well. But it's hard to accomplish now because you're stepping up in rank, I guess you would say. But it makes it more fun. I think if you're doing fantasy sports and you're not you're not playing against your own competition, then it's not really as much fun as it should be. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely did. Now, some people, they have a sport, 1 sport, 2 sports that they're really into, and that they will say, okay, that's my fantasy sport thing. I'm going to do basketball. I'm going to do football, or maybe I'm just going to do hockey because that's the sport I'm really into. You say on your show you pretty much talk all fantasy sports, or a lot of the fantasy sports out there. Are there any that you don't touch that you just say, okay, I'm not going to get into? Like, say, I know NASCAR fantasy is big, in different spots. Are there any that you just say I'm not going to touch at all?
Well, for me, like I'm not gonna be phony to my audience ever. Especially I'll give you an example. Like this year, I was struggling with my college picks. I always do like a little segment on college picks, and I was struggling. I said, you know what, guys, I'm canning this whole college pick thing because I'm not. If I don't know what I'm doing right now, I'm not gonna lead you in the wrong direction. So I found a website that does a lot of college football stuff, and I got them to do a spot on my show rather than me preach to my audience. Like when I'm doing golf, fantasy golf, I'm not really, expertise in that, so I won't really give advice, but I can give strategy, I guess you can say. Horses, when it comes to the horses, I'm pretty decent with the horses, but if I don't know something, I don't preach it, and I'll get someone, to come on who knows about it. When it comes to NASCAR, this year, I started talking more about NASCAR, but there wasn't really much of an audience there for it, so I stopped doing it. But, I was competitive in NASCAR. And I think what it comes down to is, I've done women's basketball in the past. I did hockey. I worked for the New Jersey Devils, so I know a little bit about hockey, but there's not really any fancy games in hockey, so I don't really cover that as much. But the thing is that I assure my audience and assure anyone that listens is, if anything, I don't focus on trying to tell you right from wrong, or this is my opinion and I'm right and you're wrong. I kind of more broaden it by giving strategies and ideas that work, and they seem to work across all the games. And that's what I do. So there isn't really, like I said, there isn't a sport I don't do. I'm really starting to get into international soccer as well. I started that this year. I start by watching it as much as possible. I TiVo all the games and watch them. And, there are international soccer leagues, so I'm starting to get into that. And hopefully next year I can start now really hitting on the international soccer stuff as well. So